All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Shure Wireless Workbench webinar sponsored by TC Furlong. We're happy you all could join us today. Hope everyone had a safe and fun Labor Day weekend. Before we get started, I'd like to make some quick introductions. So first off, I'm Brian Grahn with the TC Furlong sales and marketing team. For those not familiar, TC Furlong is a Chicago area-based live sound company. We handle equipment, sales and rentals, live event production, and a handful of other services, including systems design, repairs, and frequency coordination. So today we are joined by Jason Waufle with Shure's Pro Audio Division. We've got Shawn McLoughlin with Audio Biz, and Scott Helmke from the TC Furlong team. So before we dive into it, I do have some housekeeping. We are recording today's webinar, and we're hopefully posting on our YouTube page later. A link will be sent out to all registrants after we have processed and posted the video. We're not going to be monitoring the chat today for questions. If you have questions, please use the Q&A section. And we do have a planned Q&A portion at the end of today's webinar, but please submit your questions as we go. We can prioritize some questions to pose over the course of the webinar and also hopefully answer as we go. All right, so first things first, we're going to hand it over to Jason with the Shure team to give us a quick overview of Wireless Workbench and some of the new features from the 6.13 update.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. What's up, everybody? Thank you guys for joining us today. Appreciate you guys being here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So I'm not super familiar with everybody's, I guess, level of expertise with Workbench. So we're going to start with some pretty basic overview of the software for those of you that are brand new to it. If I'm moving too slow, obviously just fire away and let me know. I don't know how advanced you guys are, but I figured we'd start from the very beginning. So as you can see, hopefully now, I have just opened Wireless Workbench here. And I get a ton of questions about this more often than you'd think. And the question is, hey, I just opened Workbench and it's plugged in. I've got my cable plugged in, but I don't see any of my gear. And you can see here in the bottom right, it says 0 devices online. And this is almost always due to the fact that oftentimes you haven't pointed Workbench to the correct NIC card or network card. So if you open Workbench and you're fairly certain you've got it networked properly with the proper cable and in the proper port, the first thing you want to do is go up here to Workbench, go to Preferences. Keep in mind, I'm on a Mac, so it might look a little bit different to anybody that's on a PC. Sometimes you have to go into your PC settings for your NIC cards as well, but on a Mac, it looks a lot like this. Go over to network and you can see that I have directed Workbench to use my Wi-Fi, which is not going to function. So what I want to do is select the correct NIC card, which in this case is the USB adapter that I have plugged in. You can see it's got an IP address that's given, and I'll go ahead and hit save on that. And you'll start to see my Workbench populate with the items that I have networked inside of my rack, if you will, and that's sitting right behind me. So now I've got a visualization in my inventory tab. So let's talk about our tabs real quick from just a basic standpoint of Workbench. Workbench is generally designed around 3 main tabs, and they're right here. The first one being inventory. And this is where all of your networked inventory and even non-networked inventory can show up depending on how you choose to use the software. There's quite a few different workflows. It's a pretty robust system. So you'll notice that I may mention some things of how I do my workflow or what I think works best. And maybe later in this webinar, you'll see Scott come in and maybe have a different workflow. Neither of which are necessarily correct. It's just how you choose to use the software and the tools that are given to you. So inventory is kind of where I start, is where I begin to bring some of the gear into my workspace, whether it's networked or not. All of the gear you're seeing right now is networked. If I wanted to add a device that this wasn't networked, or if I wanted to build a show prior to being on site, you can do that in Workbench. And one of the ways to do that is in this button row up here in the top. So you see this says add new device. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And let's just say I've got a rad system that's going to be on this show. So I'm going to go Radioactive Designs. I'm going to select the base station. It's UHF, and I'm going to hit add. And you'll notice that that base station has been added here into my inventory. And then let's say I've got 4 belt packs. So I'm going to change this to 4 active channels and go ahead and hit add. And you'll see that I've got 4 belt packs and 1 base station in my inventory. You can do that for a multiple of manufacturers and devices. We at Shure, we try to put most of the major manufacturers' devices inside of here. If there's something that you're using frequently that isn't in here, you can actually email our service team, and they will have a profile created for that, or will create one for you, and they can send you a link to download that profile. So if you have a somewhat more obscure piece of gear that is in your rack and you want it to be able to live and work and play in Workbench, email customer service with the title, the manufacturer, the name, and the bandwidth of that, and they will be able to turn around a RF profile for you to include in your Workbench. So that's add a device. This is the inventory page. There's a lot of pretty cool features that you can do in here. A lot of people don't use this right panel here on the right. I'm going to go over some of the basic stuff that you can do in that. So let's look at my ULXD mics here real quick, and they're labeled red, blue, yellow, and green. And maybe that came from a rental house that way, and I don't want them to be labeled that way. Let's say those are breakout rooms. So what you can do is you can highlight those 4. You can come over here to channel name, and I can type in breakout room. And then I'm going to auto enumerate those, and we're going to start with the number 1. We should start with the number 1. Do I have numlock on? Of course, 2 minutes in. I can't type. Maybe. Oh, you know what that is? I know what that is. There's a character count, right? So breakout is too long. That was actually my 8 characters. So let's just go BRK for short. And I'll type the number 1. Now I'm under my characters, and I'll hit apply. And you'll see that I just relabeled those 4 as breakout 1, breakout 2, breakout 3, breakout 4. So if you've got 100 channels and you need to rename them all sequentially, super fast way to do it, right? Next up is what I like to call, oh, here we go. Perfect example. So I have locked my Axient digital unit here, and you'll see this represented here by this yellow mark. You can do this by setting a pin. I'm going to click that lock feature. I'm going to type my pin in, and I have now unlocked that. So if you want some security built into Workbench, you can do that anywhere you see a shield logo, just by clicking it and typing the pin code in and hitting save. Real quick, starting from left to right in my inventory tab, this green bar, that indicates that that unit is online and healthy, meaning that the network can see it. So you notice down here on my radioactive stuff, there is no green bar, there is no lock, there is no symbol for what it is, because it's not a network device. I can still look at it and use this as a way to track my inventory and track my frequencies if I wanted to. But it's that green bar is letting you know, hey, this unit is on the network or not on the network. And then some additional features to the right of that from Shure. The link chain here has to do with show link. That's letting you know that that channel has a successful link. If I hover over it, it'll tell you in the chain what the link is, right? Next up is the model. After that is our channel name. I just showed you how to name those in a sequential order quickly. You can also do them one at a time just by double clicking. You see the text box come up. Following is device ID. This is kind of an advanced network thing. If you wanted to change your device IDs for your network, you can. Band, groups and channels. If you're using group and channel coordination, they'll show up here. You can also edit them here. We're not going to do that. Next, frequency. RF zone, which I'm going to hold off on for Scott. He's going to get into our zones quite a bit later. Tags is an interesting thing. You can create tags with multiple items or other items if you want to start to group things by tag names. I don't use it a ton, but there's a lot of people that do. Inclusion group. This is another advanced RF coordination feature. I think Scott's going to get into. If not, we can dive into a little bit later. And then IP address. Again, on the right under properties, if you're a monitor engineer and you've got a set of settings that you want to set your PSM 1000s to every show. So you want them to be -6 input gain, RF muted off the bat, power locked, all of those things. You can create a preset. So let's see, I've done mic, so I'm going to go over that. If I open up this mic preset functionality here, configure presets. I'm going to go to my mic. So what you can see in here is I've created some presets. So my gain is going to be at +6. My audio output is going to be on. Interference detection's automatic. Unregistered transmitter block. There's a bunch of custom settings you can do and save that preset. And then all I would have to do is select those 4 channels or highlight them, select my mic functionalities, and hit apply. And essentially, I just took a large list of settings that I already saved in a preset functionality and applied them to a real-world rack of gear. So if instead of having to walk into a venue and manually go to the front of a rack and change all these settings to whatever your specified settings are on a Shure piece of gear, you can on your machine, and keep in mind that those presets save to your workbench locally. So you can build presets for all the gear you would come into contact with on the road or in a venue or whatever it may be. Plug your workbench in on your computer. Those presets are going to be saved. Highlight them and hit apply, and you've just reprogrammed your entire rack to the settings that you prefer in a matter of seconds instead of 15 minutes of dialing the front of a receiver. So some pretty cool functionality in this inventory page that a ton of people don't take advantage of. You can do RF locks. You can do advanced RF settings. There's all kinds of items over here. So I encourage you to spend a little bit of time playing around in there. We're going to keep this a little bit brief today. We're not going to dive super deep, but something that you may have not looked at. I know a lot of people, I'm seeing some comments over here in the chat, so I'm glad it's being well received. You can really save a lot of time over here in these properties. Cool. So that is the inventory tab. One other thing, I love this button on the bottom. It's called Flash All Devices. For some reason, if you've got if you have a giant rack of everything networked and you don't want to go through and count in this inventory page all 70 receivers or whatever, if everything's networked right and you hit flash, you can see this rack behind me light up like a Christmas tree. It's very easy to look at the front of a rack and go, hey, that receiver didn't flash. Why that one's not networked, right? And so it's a really quick troubleshooting tool. It will also flash transmitters that are connected. So I don't know if you can see this, but if I do this, again, you can see the transmitter will actually flash as well to tell you that it is connected to ShowLink. So a quick troubleshooting tool to let yourself know that everything is networked properly when you're staring at a ton of inventory. So the next tab over is our frequency coordination tab. This is where a lot of people tend to live, and that's fine. It is where most of my time is spent. So I'm going to just go through a real quick demo of some stuff just to give you some new features as well as how this works. And then Scott's going to go quite a bit deeper later on. So I'm going to select over here in the top left is my scan sources. This will show you all of the units that you're networked to that are eligible to be used as a scan. So I have a V50 ULXD, I've got a G57 Axient Digital, and then I have a Axient 600 Spectrum Manager. So I'm going to select the Axient 600 Spectrum Manager because it's wideband, and I'm going to, instead of continuous, hit one sweep, and I'm going to hit scan with one source. And what you're going to see populate here is a live RF scan of this Spectrum Manager right behind me and the whip antennas it's connected to. You'll notice there is a couple RF peaks showing up here, like this one right here. I made the mistake of not turning off my transmitters before scanning. So you'll see that it's going to identify those as not necessarily interference, but it sees that RF transmission power, as you would hope, because it's doing a scan. So what we've got is a little bit of noise floor action going on here and some hyper tall peaks from the RF that I have on currently. What else you're looking at is the A antenna just finished its sweep, and now you're seeing the B antenna overlay on top of that. It's going to do some math and create an average between those two. So if you've got a large antenna system set up with multiple A and multiple B antennas, it's going to look at all of your A's and then all of your B's and give you kind of an averaged sum of what that antenna system is seeing throughout its deployment. So now that I've created a scan, it's going to show me some of these blue peaks that have come up. And what that is what Workbench believes to be something that's high enough to create interference, or something it needs to coordinate around. And where it gets that information is this red line down here at the bottom. The red line is what we call the exclusion threshold. There's two ways to edit this. You can either just click it and drag it when this little paw shows up. So if I pull it all the way down below my noise floor, you can see the entire spectrum is now above this threshold line. Therefore, there's going to be no room to coordinate in. If I were to take that and bring it all the way up, let's say above that peak there, you can see that this peak and this peak are now not necessarily being accounted for in the math. So what I like to do is I like to pull this bad boy right above where I believe my noise floor is acceptable. So right about there. And any of these little peaks and these high frequencies, you can see there is now a blue flag or blue marker that is showing that it's going to be accounted for. The next thing you want to look at is the scan peak threshold, which is this orange bar. And what this is saying is, hey, everything that's above this red bar, we're going to include in our coordination from a interference standpoint. Everything that's above the orange bar, we're going to actually give a profile to. And what that means is we're going to start to go a little bit deeper and say, hey, this might be a carrier. This might be something that's a little bit more apparent. And we're going to give it a profile, a generic profile that says, hey, do we account for intermods or do we not, right? And it's going to give you a more specific marker, which is what this little blue asterisk or diamond is at the top. So if you know that there's Joe in the venue next to you and he's operating on 551 and change, which is where we're here, you can highlight this and hit change profile. Generic device, IMDB wideband is selected right now. What that's telling you is this is a generic device. We don't necessarily know what it is. We're accounting for intermodulation, and we're assuming that it is a wideband transmitter in terms of that how much the transmission path or how much space we need to avoid around it. You can change that to no intermod, IMDB, generic exclusion, which means we're going to exclude that space, IMDB wideband, or you can create a custom profile if you want to get really interesting. And so we can label it with a specific device if we know what it is. So that's kind of our basic scan window as we're looking at a scan that just came through. And what does that mean when you see some of that colors and those markers pop up? Again, the scan peak threshold can be moved with this hand marker, or over here on the right, you see the orange bar and the red bar and the actual value sum. And that can be changed on the right there as well. Cool. So we've got a scan. The scan is in. The next thing I want to do real quick is just show you how to bring some inventory in. So down here on the right, if you're just going to coordinate for stuff that's networked, you can hit select frequencies from inventory. That brings up a pop-up, which I don't think you can see. Can you see it now? I just pulled it over to this window. Yeah, okay. So we're going to hit all frequencies from inventory, which means everything that's in my inventory tab is going to come through here. So you see I've got my UV1G belt packs, my radioactive stuff, as well as my everything that was networked that was in my inventory tab. So a lot of people like to input frequencies from this tab. And what I mean by that is if I hadn't put those radioactive PLs in here, the RAD systems in my inventory tab, they wouldn't have shown up when I hit select frequency from inventory. So what I could have done is I could have right down here, I can say, hey, I want to also add, let's say a couple electrosonics, right? So I need to add a couple standard block 20s, default zone. We're going to add 2 of those. So when earlier I mentioned there's a couple workflow ways to do things, you can totally add inventory from this page. However, what you'll notice is that standard block 20 showed up here in my frequency coordination tab. But if I go back to my inventory tab, that electro unit is not going to be there. Okay, so we made a decision to separate those 2 tabs except for this select frequencies from inventory box, which is where that will drag that data and put it in. There's a couple reasons for that. There's some workflow decisions about that. So keep in mind, anything you add in inventory can be brought over to this space with this button, but it doesn't work the other way around. So keep that in mind in your workflow. However, if you're totally happy with living in this page, which a lot of people do, just live in this page. That's fine. So the next step, now I've got all the inventory of things I want to coordinate. I'm going to go ahead and hit analyze. We're going to do a quick numbers game. You'll see that it said, hey, your PSM and your V50 is fine. The rest of this stuff is red, meaning that it didn't particularly like the frequencies that were currently there, or there's no frequencies there. So I haven't given these standard electrode block 20s a frequency yet. So the next thing I do is hit calculate. It's going to do a whole bunch of math. It came up with all the frequencies I needed. And if I hit assign and deploy, hit deploy to inventory, I just coordinated my entire rack. Anything that was connected via network has been changed, and I can manually type in my Electro Block 20s and my RADCOM units here, and all of the coordination should be mathematically correct. So again, this is hyper quick, but I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of overview of what this software can do. So on to what is new for those of you that know all this already. In the newest release, we did a couple things. The first thing we added was band overlay, which if you look up here on the top, when I hit add frequencies, you'll notice that now I have these blue boxes up here. And you'll see that this says UHF, this says G10, G57, and block 20. So the G10 is my PSM 1000s that I have in my rack behind me. And what we've done is we've showed you graphically where that lives in your spectrum graph. So let me make this full screen. So you can see that the G10 frequencies live from here to here. So it's just a helpful tool when you've got a lot of frequencies and some noise floor going on from your scan. As you add inventory to your frequency coordination space, you'll start to see these band overlays show up. And it will help you visualize, hey, you know, if I had 60 frequencies in this block 20 space already, maybe that's not the best piece of gear to choose, right? So just a visual representation of where the gear lives within the RF space to help you just visually see what's going on. The next thing we added is channel-to-channel spacing markers. And so you have to turn these on. But if I wanted to, I could zoom in here to, let's just go with this frequency right here. And we're going to say show spacing. And I'm going to show my channel-to-channel spacing. And we're going to have to get way tight in here at the bottom of this, but you can see what I've done is I've put this little purple drop here. And this is the manufacturer recommended channel-to-channel spacing requirements for this specific transmitter. I can also add channel and third spacing. So you see my 2x3 spacings, that's how far away it needs to be from intermods. So there's a lot of graphical additions to this software. Obviously, I was zoomed way in, but when you get a ton of frequencies in your space, those overlays and that channel-to-channel spacing visualizations can really help you. The last really cool thing we added is intermod products. So if you come down to your plot properties on the right here, and you scroll down and you say view intermodulation products, and we'll go ahead and turn on thirds and fifths. And what you can see now is all of the thirds are kind of the ones that are a little bit higher, and all of the fifths are the intermods that are a little bit lower. So if you are if you're unfamiliar with intermods and you're not really sure how they work, or visually if you're struggling with what that means, this is a really cool tool to show you how intermods look and how much space can be taken up by them. So the other cool thing that we've done is if you hover over a marker, and on a Mac, you hit Command. I'm not exactly sure what it is on a Windows, might be Control. If I click and drag this, you can actually see those third intermods moving as I drag this around. So as I get closer to this carrier to my right, you can see the intermods that are created because of how close I get to that space, right? So if I pull this away a little bit, you can see those intermods moving, and the fifths are moving as well. So it's a really cool tool to say, hey, where can I move this safely? Where, you know, if we're looking at this marker here, and I move this, you can see that if I were to place that unit right about there, there's an intermod that sits right on top of that, right? So obviously the Workbench software is doing the math for you, and that should never happen. But if you need to manually drop something, you can do that, and you can move this around and make sure visually that your intermods are safe. So those are kind of the new features of Workbench that we added. We had a lot of requests for a more visually sound frequency plot, and so we're trying to make that possible for you guys. So the intermods and the band overlays, as well as the channel-to-channel spacing markers, have been pretty well received. So I know we're pushing up here on what is my time. The last thing I want to cover real quick is the monitor tab. For those of you that aren't familiar, the monitor tab is basically the front of your rack, but visualized in Workbench. So I'm going to open my 4 Axient digital channels and my 2 P10Rs and my VHF ULXDs. So this is a pretty sweet page where you can look at your rack just on a computer screen. We use this a lot to remote visualization of an RF rack to an A1 that was in a truck, or the A2 table that was somewhere far away from the actual RF rack. If you can get network over fiber and ship this software to them, they can kind of have a monitoring station, and the RF rack doesn't have to be anywhere near you. A lot of tools to be had in this page that a lot of people don't really realize. The biggest one, I'm going to get rid of our ULXD. The biggest one is people don't really know that here you can, on Axient Digital specifically, you can switch between the transmitter and the receiver because of ShowLink and because we have two-way control. So standard, it's going to say receiver in this part of your monitoring tab. However, if I want to hit this right button, I can scroll through my paired list. So right now I am controlling what is the ADX1 or the transmitter that is on this channel, versus if I scroll here, now I'm controlling the receiver. So if I were to hit mute on this, I have now audio muted the output of channel 1 on my Axient digital receiver. However, if I scroll to the right and hit mute, what I've actually done is RF muted that belt pack, and you can see that RF go away. So you can control both your transmitters and your receivers from this channel strip. I see a lot of people that don't necessarily recognize that scroll feature there. That's pretty fantastic. Additionally, you can see all of your networkable battery chargers. So if I open my rack mount battery charger, that is right behind me, it's showing that all my slots are empty. If I throw some batteries in there, you'll see that it's going to show me how long till they charge, how are they at. It'll also give me errors and alerts, as you can see. So I had a little battery charge error there. I just need to reinsert it. So all of my battery information is available here as well. And one thing we did add that a lot of people, we forget about on the new features, we added the 610 access point management strip. So I now can open my ShowLink, and the ShowLink management is going to show me what transmitters, their signal strength, and their battery level. So if you have multiple ShowLinks connected to your system, and you want to know which transmitters are on which ShowLink, you can do this now in the monitor tab here.
All right. Jason, I got a couple questions for you.
Fantastic. Fire away.
So I want to kind of cut in and give away a couple secrets to everyone that's watching us here. So before we talk about the new TV station database that I want to get into.
Oh, fantastic. Yep.
Can you show everyone real quick the fastest way to add a backup frequency in the frequency coordination page?
Yes. There's a pretty sweet little tool that a lot of people don't know about as well. And I think that was a leaded question, which is fantastic. So I'm going to go into my frequency coordination tab. I'm going to find my Axient Digital G57, which is right here. The long way to do it would be to come through this request additional frequency inventory tab that I did here on the right. However, if you just right click on your channel, down here at the very bottom, there's add primary and add backup frequencies. So I'm going to use this little scroll bar and I'm going to say, hey, I want 6 backup frequencies. One more step here. This is a little button. So I'm just going to go ahead and now confirm by clicking add backup frequencies. You'll notice that I just added 6 backup frequencies to this ADG57. Now that they're there, they're highlighted yellow because they are not coordinated yet. So I'm going to go ahead and hit calculate. We're going to recalculate those. You'll notice the backup frequencies are now green. Everything is compatible. If I hit assign and deploy, it's going to spit those frequencies over as well as put my backup frequencies into my spectrum manager. Did that answer your question, Brian?
That's great. Yeah. Save everyone a lot of time.
There's a lot of right-click secrets. Brian was mentioning this earlier. So if you're playing around in Workbench and you want to try and see if there's a better way to do it, just do yourself a favor and try right-clicking on pretty much anything in the program. And there's a lot of features there, like, right-click here and hit full screen plot. I did that earlier. So there's a lot of things that you can do with the right-click. If you've got some time to kill, do yourself a favor and right-click all over this software because there's a ton of hidden gems in there.
Let's talk about the TV band, if we can.
Real quick, Heather makes a good point here, and I didn't talk about the lock. I don't want to take up a ton of time. When I just hit calculate, I recalculated all of the frequencies in my space. And Heather makes a good point. If you don't want to do that, so you're 100 frequencies deep and people are using them and you don't want to change them, all you have to do is hit this little lock button right here, right? And so I can lock all by doing this. Right now, everything is locked. And so if I were to go back in here and hit, hey, also, once you've added backup frequencies, this little plus button is actually the fastest way to do it. So if you have backup frequencies, just hit this little plus button. Now all my frequencies are locked in my space. If I hit calculate again, it's going to leave all the frequencies where they were. It's going to find me, highlighted in green, 3 new frequencies, and I'm going to go ahead and hit assign and deploy. All of these are still locked except for the ones that are not, and you can see the 3 of them there. And I'll hit deploy to deploy, and we're going to move those 3 frequencies over, and everything else stayed as it was before. Thank you, Heather. Go ahead, Brian.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about the updated TV station database.
Yeah, absolutely. We're pretty excited about this. For a long time, we were using kind of a secondary source for our TV database information. And if you're unfamiliar with what that is, this is over here where you go to Spectrum and you go to TV channels and you use a postal code lookup. So I'm going to use, what's Chicago? Anybody know? I should know this.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself.
60060.
60060. And I'm going to search for TV channels. So previously, we were using a secondary database that was kind of managed by the government to give us these TV channels. And they weren't always the most accurate. So I'll leave it at that. What we have done in this last update is we have swapped that to Shure Wireless Frequency Finder, or an internal database. And you'll actually notice here in the bottom left of this page says reserves powered by Shure Wireless Frequency Finder, and there's a link. And so we're pretty excited about this for 2 reasons. One, you can use this link to get to this page, and you can do a lot of stuff inside Frequency Finder. And we believe that it's going to be a lot more accurate moving forward because we're managing it and we're actively trying to keep it more updated than the outsourced database that we were using previously.
So this database, to confirm, is completely up to date with all of the 600 megahertz moves that in all markets, correct?
Yes.
In all U.S. markets that have
in all U.S. markets, yes. In the databases that were publicly listed, they have been updated, and yes, they are as up to date as we possibly believe they can be. Yep, much more up to date than they were previously.
Exactly. Great.
Yeah. So anyways, if you're unfamiliar with that tool, I went ahead and put that postal code in, hit search, hit import, and you'll notice now there is a load of red on my frequency plot, and that's because those are what we believe to be DTV channels inside the Chicago area. So I'm not going to go into how I would coordinate around that because I've already taken up quite a bit of time. We can get back into that later, but I do believe Scott is going to go through quite a bit of that as well. I really just wanted to show you the new features and give you a brief overview of all 3 tabs and some of the hidden gems that some people don't know about. So I think, Scott, I'm going to pass it over to you for a little bit more of an in-depth frequency coordination dive.
Okay, well, thanks. That was actually, I think I learned 1 or 2 little tricks additionally that I didn't know before. So every time I see one of those, it's like, oh, you can do that too, and then I forget. But
I
there's
learned
always other
something today,
ways.
right? In the pre-call today, we were talking about how to get the graph to stay plot shading, right? So plot shading is an interesting thing. You'll notice down here on the bottom, if I turn off my thirds and fifths, I had this unchecked somehow. I think I accidentally clicked it, but you'll see that it's not shaded at the bottom. And pre-call here, Shawn pulled up his workbench and it was shaded. And I was like, hey man, how do we do that? So we spent a couple of minutes looking for it, and there it was. But there's always something to be learned in the software. That's why I love doing webinars on it. But I'll stop talking, Scott. Fire away. It's all you.
All right, great. Well, thank you. So my name is Scott Helmke. I work for TC Furlong, and I'm kind of, among other things, I do a lot of wireless stuff. And let's see here. I am going to share my screen. Boink. All right, there we go. One more button. Okay, so we'll start with the obligatory PowerPoint here. So this came up because we talked about doing a large situation where you have a lot of different frequencies to coordinate and what tricks you might have to use to make that happen. I didn't do obviously none this year. We didn't really end up doing any last year. I did Riot Fest 2 years in a row, 2017 and 2018, also Pitchfork in 2017. And these are where you have multiple stages. You are also, you don't have the luxury of knowing ahead of time what all you've got. You've basically got to show up with a laptop, communicate with everybody who might have wireless, and assign them good frequencies. So it's kind of a juggling act and a balancing act. It's interesting. I learned a lot doing it. And this is the result of that. Okay, so first thing is, what are you avoiding? Your TV stations and stuff like that. So let's see, make that the slide. One of the real common, inexpensive, but pretty good frequency analyzers is the TTI, and we've got a couple at the shop. Typically, I would basically show up for these with a laptop and a TTI, and one of the things I could have done is you can do a scan in the TTI. You actually have to do several scans over several frequency blocks to get enough resolution. You can import that in a Wireless Workbench. You can then see what TV stations you have. I kind of decided that that took too much time. And so what I would do is I would just use the TTI to figure out which TV stations I had. And the clever setup for that is that I would actually, the screen is 10 divisions, 10 spaces. So I would basically make up a 60 megahertz block because each TV channel is 6 megahertz wide. And so they would line up with these blocks here. So here's channel 14 or channel 24 in the settings I've got here. So 24, 25, 26, 27, 20, you can really easily see where you've got a TV channel. And then I could go into Wireless Workbench, and on top of, say, using the zip code lookup to get a head start on things, I could turn on and off all the TV stations that were actually present. And so that's all I really needed. Like if there was anything else, I'm in the middle of a big park, basically. If there's anything else, I should know about it, and I should find out about it and be able to assign it frequencies. So any gear that's local, I'm going to find out about. And I might see something big in here, and I might have to keep track of that. But I'm not going to do a scan because it's just, there's a lot of setup time involved in that. Okay. So here was Riot Fest 2018. It's about 1/4 of a mile from stage 1 to stage 5. So we got the 2 headliner stages, 1 and 2 next to each other. 3 is off to the side, 4 is kind of further back, and then 5 is way off in a corner of the park. The big thing about intermod is that it happens when things are close together. This is where the one transmitter is actually leaking into the internal circuitry of another device. And in the process, because wireless is, the way RF works is kind of messy, it produces other frequencies. They just kind of go through the grind of getting through a transmitter, and they come out several other frequencies. So if you're not close together, you don't have to worry as much about intermod. So for instance, I'm definitely not worried about internet mod between stages 1 and 3 or 4 and 5. And really, I'm not even that worried about stages 1 and 2 all that much. It's probably not going to be an issue. When I've done sporting events, when the TV guys show up with these 1/4 of a watt transmitters, 250 milliwatt old Sennheiser and Electrosonics things, then maybe I have to worry about it. If it's all standard audio gear like Shure UHFR, Axient Digital, or the equivalent Sennheiser stuff, it's not really a big concern. I just want to make sure that on a stage, I worry about intermods between the gear on a particular stage, and I worry about channel spacing, just not being on the same frequencies as another stage. Okay, so when I'd get there, actually ahead of time, I would have a nice handout because you got to communicate with people. So this is what I'd hand out and what I'd give to basically everybody working all the other stages. Usually I'd be at the headliner stage, but I'd walk around to the other stages and meet all the monitor techs who I'd really be communicating with. And I'd basically say, I need to know what all you got. I'm going to give you frequencies. This is important. In return, you got to give them something to appreciate. You'll get good frequencies. And also, if you have problems, I can come help you out. So that's kind of where it starts. I might get ahead of time, depending from the different sound companies and the organizers, I might get some information about what all is going to be on the different stages. So this was a Sunday, and here's stage 1. Earlier bands are at the top, headliners are at the bottom. I've got a list of what all stuff they're bringing, and I might find out that ahead of time. I might find it out the day of, but it's really important for me to get that in there and any contact information. Usually, as I said, I'd be dealing with the monitor technicians that came with a stage. So those would be the ones who would be helping me out. They'd be the ones responsible for getting the band set up anyways, so they were good to work with. Let's see. So, and not everybody would bring their own stuff. Every stage would have a little package of stuff, usually that the sound company would bring, maybe a few wireless mics, a few in-ears. And so I'd have to do those ahead of time. The other thing just to bear in mind is that at this festival, probably others, headliners would set up first in the morning. They would sound check first. They would get all their setup. Everybody else had to work around them. So first thing in the morning, I'm actually working with the headliners and giving them frequencies. Those are then locked in for the rest of the day, and I have to work around it. Okay, and that means that when I'm working in Wireless Workbench, I am saving a lot of versions of things. I am actually, you see most of the work happens in the morning here. I'm basically giving myself a version number. I'm starting to fill in what I'm doing. So I've got a reminder if I need to go back, if I screwed something up, I can jump back a little bit. At some point later on in the afternoon, I basically got stuff figured out. Things still get discovered. Bands are still showing up and setting up, and they're, hour before they play. So
Scott, I do want to say I love your naming scheme for everything.
I had to make it a little more family friendly before I posted this. But and by the end, I'm doing what's called pruning, which is that I'm getting rid of bands that have already finished playing and they're done, they're gone. So I'm freeing up frequencies in case I have problems with somebody later on needing a backup or replacement. It gives me some more room to work with. Okay, process is that I communicate primarily with stage techs, get the data, do zones. We're going to get into zones in a second. Future bands that are going to be playing later, I put them off as long as possible. We saw about the feature where you can lock channels. Well, when I publish some frequencies to a particular act, to a particular stage, then I lock their frequencies, and then I can't change them because I've already told somebody they can use them. Save early, save often, keep many revisions. Headliner always gets the best frequencies. That's important. And a prune finish bands to make room for the future. Okay, that's the basic setup right there. Let us get into Wireless Workbench. And this is in the current version of Wireless Workbench, but this is a file from 2 years ago. This is that Sunday. And I've got zones set up. And zones are, so we'll talk about zones. You can always just create zones. Zones are real easy just to create a zone. And what a zone is that it's kind of its own, not exactly its own space for a stage. It could be a stage, it could be a band that plays at a different time than another band. It's very flexible what you can do with this, but basically between two zones, by default, you worry about not being on the same frequencies, but you don't worry about intermod. So at the simplest, if you were playing on one stage and somebody else is playing on another stage where you don't have to worry about intermod, you get put into two separate zones. That frees up a lot of space because avoiding intermods takes away some of the space you have to work with. So what I do is I divide everything up into zones here. So I have each stage, not every stage, there we go. Okay, so let's open this up. I'm gonna open this up so I can see what I got. Each stage would tend to have a package of wireless. So here they have some Axient digital. They've got some Sennheiser in-ears, whatever the stage decided they were gonna need based on the riders they were getting. And then individual bands might be showing up with their own stuff, in which case I don't have to worry about the stage stuff, but it probably should stay on anyways. So here, Bullet for My Valentine brought a whole lot of in-ears. Everything was Sennheiser. Oh, too bad. Okay, here we go. Father John Misty, a whole lot of in-ears, but PSM 1000. So I'd get all this stuff and I'd start putting it into these zones. And again, I'm paying attention mostly to the bands that are actually sound checking first, and that's the headliners. So what I would do is, these are all locked as you can see, but I would be locking stuff as soon as I told somebody they could use a frequency, but I'd leave everything else unlocked because that gave me the most flexibility, gave the program the most flexibility to keep recalculating and moving stuff around. Okay, so that's the basic thing there. Now I'm going to point out the cool new feature. I had asked, because we knew somebody, I had asked if there was some way to turn zones on and off, which there wasn't a way to do it in Wireless Workbench, and IAS doesn't really have a good way to do it either. IAS is a competing software product. That is to say, if there was a band playing that evening, could I just turn their zone off so that I didn't have to worry about their frequencies until we got closer to the time? That was a big deal. What they ended up doing with Shure is they came up with this crazy thing, but this is actually maybe a better answer. And this is between any two zones, you can decide if you're worried about channel spacing, which is the blue column, by default it's on, and whether or not you care about intermod, which by default is off. So all these zones don't care about intermod between them, but they do care about direct hits, about being on roughly the same frequency, you know, too close to not have good operation. So what you could do with this actually, and I'm going to demonstrate that in my next little thing, is you could actually turn off a couple things after they were done, or if they weren't going to be on for a while, and that'd give you a little more space to work with. Okay, so now the other thing I'll point out, I don't use the inventory, I don't use the monitor, I am strictly in the frequency coordination tab. That's where I'm doing everything, because I'm not networked to anybody. I might get to steal a scan from somebody's gear if they're being friendly, and just to see how things are going at that stage. But let us look at this bogus little example file I made up, which is called the Mega Rock Show. And this is, there we go. Okay, once again, nothing in inventory, frequency coordination. The TV stations are a little different because these are actually the ones that are current for now. We're after the big repack and everything's a little bit different. But our spectrum for, let's see, how do I drag this? Oh yeah, all right. Our spectrum's a little limited now. And of course, I don't have a live scan, so I don't know if there's TV stations that I could let go. You know, things that just aren't very strong where I am or aren't broadcasting for whatever reason. But what I've done is I've put in a number of fake little bands that I made up, and I've given them names based on the stage number. This example has two stages, stage 1 and stage 2, and when they start playing. So that helps me keep track of what's what. Now, I've got all these ones up here. I'm going to open it up so I can see everybody. So a pile of sweaters just has a couple of Sennheiser mics. Fallen Bones has, some of these have already gotten ones assigned because I was playing with this earlier. Mega Claw has a whole nice setup. This one just has one. Bubble Happy is a rapper, I think, and just has one microphone. And Jazz Odyssey has a whole bunch of stuff as a headliner would. Okay, let's calculate here and see what we get. And it's not looking super great. I'm getting most of them, but I'm definitely, my headliner is close. One of the stages, its frequencies are kind of short. Now, if you look at the bottom here, we're still calculating, and we're only about 6% of the way along. And it might find stuff. I usually find that if I give it an hour, it still probably doesn't get me much closer to where I was. So I am going to stop that and try to figure out what I can do to give myself some more frequencies. So let's look at our zones. All right, so here we go. Right now, I have got, okay, all the blue ones are checked, meaning that we're not going to let anybody directly interfere. We've also got some of the intermod ones checked off here. So for instance, let's see, okay, between Fallen Bones and Pile of Sweater, there is, because one might be setting up while the other is playing, I've decided to turn on intermod, to worry about intermod between those. So I might actually turn some of those off. So let's say if we, okay, let's see, what else do we have here? Stage 1 and Stage 2, the package that comes with each stage. Well, that's going to be turned off when the headliner plays. So maybe I'll turn those off and see what that does for me. I can have the stagehands turn those off for me. Okay, so we're a lot closer already. We're just down to Fallen Bones being a little short. So we'll look at our zones again. Okay, that one was worried about interfering with the band before it, Pile of Sweaters, but I'm going to turn that off just to see what it gets me, because we're not definitely not in headliner territory there. All right, so we're getting a little better. It's still not great. Actually, it's about the same. But let's go back and look again here. And do I really care about an opening act on one stage hours before the headliner plays? And the answer is probably not. So, you know, we're gonna maybe actually turn off between Jazz Odyssey and a band that plays several hours earlier. I'm not too worried about that. And I'm gonna turn off some intermod here too. Whoops, no, not the button. Okay, there's the button. Calculate. And wow, okay, why are we still having trouble? Let us take a look here. So Fallen Bones has one frequency it hasn't found yet. Okay. So that's 482, that's ULXD G50. And that is 482, so that's down low, which is a crowded place around here. Okay. Now I happen to know, well, I'm going to look it up actually. Let's look at my TV channels here. Oh, got to stop the calculation to look. Okay, so my TV channels here, what are they? So 17 is, it's only 300,000 watts and it's 40 miles away. It's in Indiana. My on-site scan might have told me that was not super strong. I'm not sure yet, but you know, it's not one of these million watt stations that are only 5 miles away. So maybe 17, I'm going to right click right here and just turn off that exclusion. I can do it in the other one, but I could do it here if I was looking at my scanner. And let's just see what happens then. Still not great. Okay. This is what happens when you kind of get down to this and you really start having to pick at stuff a little bit. There we go. We're good there. Something else I could have done, which I end up doing quite often, is if you are highlighted, if I've got the header highlighted, I can go under compatibility and I can start playing with some of the parameters that it uses to determine intermod issues. So you can be robust or standard or more frequencies. So you might end up picking more frequencies. And what it does there is that it looks a little differently at some of these things that are the intermod calculation. So channel 2 transmitter thirds, and that is two transmitters close together, what's the third product? And in this case, it's giving me a minimum of keeping 75 kilohertz away from that. If I go robust, I'm actually looking further ahead. And depending on the gear I'm looking at, so for instance, I got to keep juggling my tab here for the conference. If I look at one that's got some analog stuff, let's say, it might actually have some different things that it's looking at as far as that. This is part of the whole equipment profile thing. But in a nutshell, that's kind of what you end up doing. And you end up doing that just over and over again over a whole day to try to fit everybody in. So there we go. Now that's good. I might actually, so my two headliners, I am going to say, I am going to, let's see, I want to, how do I do this? I think I can, yeah. I want to lock all those, highlight them all, lock them. So now those guys are locked, but I can change other ones around. If some other band comes in, if there's a change in the gear that I thought I was going to have, these can still recalculate. And so until I've published those frequencies, until I've told somebody they can use them, I keep them unlocked. And that's basically the bulk of the process right there. And it looks like I've blown quite a lot of time talking about it, but do we have any questions?
Scott, I've got one for you. And,
all right.
And you touched on it at the beginning, but basically interpreting scans, you know, you were only looking at which TV bands, which TV channels that you wanted to avoid. What is your threshold for if you see something that is slightly over the noise floor, when you should be avoiding it, or when you can maybe sneak some channels in there?
Well, okay, so a lot of this is that you follow the manufacturer's recommendations, you use the software, you follow good procedures, and then when that runs out, you start looking at what you can get away with. And so if it's a weak station, like I said, you know, I could try turning this station off here because it looks like it's a distant one. I would know if I had a TTI in my hand on the show site how strong it really was. And it might change a little bit. It might be a little stronger or weaker at night. But generally, if it's a distant low power station, I can get away with turning it off. Something else I might do if I was working with headliners and I really wanted to give them good frequencies is there is a feature called inclusion groups. And I could actually, if there was a nice empty thing that I knew was empty, can be consistently empty, no station there, I could actually go under inclusions and I could make up an inclusion group. So let's see here. And I'm going to make a group. I don't use this very much. I'm trying to remember how it works. Okay, list. And I can make a group in that and I can call the group call it something. Okay, and in there, once it's highlighted, I could put in, let's say that's channel 18. All right, so I can save that. And then when I'm looking at my headliner, I don't even know if they're in channel 18 or not. I didn't look. Okay, yeah, so this stuff is. I believe what I can do, yeah, I can move that to an inclusion group. So let's do all those. And I might have to make it a, what that basically means when I calculate it, and I'll have to unlock everything, is that those get first shot at this nice empty space. And so I can definitely keep that open if I'm real sure that that's always empty for my headliner. If it can fit some other ones on, it will, but that's one way to do it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Going back to the question of, you know, the database versus what you're actually seeing in a scan. You know, does the directionality of an antenna sometimes affect that as well? Like whether or not you're seeing a lower power station from further away?
Yeah, it could. You could totally, Depending on your location, if you are in the usual monitor position on stage left of a stage that weighs many tons, you probably have to aim your antenna a certain direction. If that happens to be away from the TV transmitters, away from Sears Tower here in Chicago, that probably would help you a little bit. For the most part, you basically just try to do what you can. You could, if you really had a lot of flexibility and had a lot of antenna cable, you could, if you're one stage next to another, you could try to put an antenna on the other side to really cover your stage well. And mostly you're trying to just pick up your on-stage transmitters, your microphones, better than you're picking up any interference.
That's great.
I don't know if it really affects intermod all that much. So intermod is what's close together. And that's sort of, if you're doing in-ears, for instance, and you've got an antenna combiner, which you probably should do, it's good practice, you will get certain intermod products just because they're all going through one combiner into one antenna. And that's why kind of the rules are a little bit different if you look at the profiles.
Sure. Well, speaking of in-ears, what's the best practice for keeping your in-ear transmit antennas? What distance away from your microphone receiver antennas?
As far as you can.
Okay.
Several feet is good. Several feet is good. Not on the same stand is good. If you usually orient your antennas kind of, like the shark fin thing, really they should be more like rabbit ears one way or another. But if you do that with your receive antennas and you do your in-ear transmit antenna at a different angle, somewhere in between, that kind of puts it at its polarization. It kind of helps it keep it a little bit separate sort of in the air. Although a lot of the big acts, the big stage setups, they use a helically polarized antenna for in-ears, and that doesn't really have a polarization angle, so it doesn't matter. Distance is good though. That's the big thing.
That's great. Well, thanks for that, Scott. Super informative for me even. Right now we don't have a bunch of questions, so I want to kind of open it up to everyone. If you have any specific questions about the new features in Workbench or Scott's specific coordination that he was just working on, or really just kind of any questions, feel free to ask those now. We've got a little bit of time left.
Thank you, Scott, by the way. That was awesome. I appreciate you running through that. It's always nice to see somebody's workflow. Everybody does things a little bit differently. I have to agree with Brian that the file naming was fantastic. Right.
Yeah. We've got a question here from the chat, which is, what would the distance for a helical antenna? I guess that's still, sorry.
No, that's okay. I can interpret that two ways. Like, how far does a helical antenna transmit, or how far should it be away from my receive antennas, right? So the first part of that is how far does it transmit. That's dependent on quite a few things, but it's how much signal you're putting into it, what the power of your transmitter is, and then obviously noise floor. There's a lot of things that go into that, but you should be getting 300, 400 feet out of that bad boy line of sight if you're doing everything right. As what Scott said, I like to say keep them as far away as possible or as practical. The farther apart your transmit can be from your receive antennas, the better. Obviously, they can't be infinitely apart, but make educated decisions on what your transmitter antenna needs to reach and what your receive antennas need to reach. And make sure that you're not hurting yourself with your output transmission.
Something else you can play with too, depending on what you've got with you. When I did the Pitchfork one, I was actually the technician for a rack of gear that we rented to the headliner stage. And so I had antennas and I had cables and all kinds of stuff. And for a rap group, what I ended up doing was actually borrowing a little short kick drum mic stand from the stage crew and taping a half-wave antenna, just the whip antenna that comes with your receiver, and putting that right in the center, right down in front with the long cable. So when the rapper's right in front, he's like 10 feet away from the thing at worst, really. So yeah. I had no problems at all there, and it was well away from any other transmissions happening. And that's the kind of thing, think a little outside the box sometimes. If you put the antennas to cover where the people are going to be. And if they're going to be in one spot, if you can put an antenna right there, that's just gravy.
Yeah, so that's the idea of using your two antennas as two zones rather than as a diversity to worry about phase or polarization, right?
Well, I think generally you want as much diversity as you can get away with. You want to basically try to keep everything into both antennas coverage area for a diversity system. But you can always just use totally different antennas, put them in different locations if it'll cover that area effectively.
Nice.
Yeah, I like to say it's wireless for the user, but don't make it necessarily wireless for you. And what I mean by that is, like, I see a lot of people put antennas up 10 feet away from their rack because, oh, it's wireless. It should just work. Well, your job is to make sure that it works. So if you need to run 200 feet of cable to get that antenna where it needs to be to make sure that it works and it's still wireless for the user, right? Then your job is to make it wireless for the user, not wireless for you. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Oh, you do see situations sometimes where there's the long runway down the middle and the little B stage at the end in the middle of the audience, and you see the monitor technician kind of up there, sort of aiming the antennas to follow them down there, and that's kind of what they have to do. They may not be in a situation where they can put an antenna down there, but it is, be aware of where people are going to be and set up your antennas once you've thought about that, instead of just slapping them down where you can just plug them in, and as most people put it, you can basically pack up and get out faster at the end of the night.
Yeah. So we got a couple questions about what's the best learning resources for coordination, or is there any published list of the hidden gems in Workbench? So Scott, you have any good resources for coordination?
Best thing to do is download the software and play with it, and just get used to it, see what it does. It's really cool that there is this free, really powerful software that you can download that going to have your local TV stations in it. Do that. I kind of got thrown into the deep end a couple of times doing these, and that's sort of where I did a lot of learning. But in general, I think Shure's got some videos online. The documentation's really good.
Yeah. Can I share my real quick?
It's not like you have to pay for the software, right? Just your time.
Can you guys see this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you go in Workbench up to help, there's two really cool menus. So the first one says tutorial videos. And if you hit that, it will open a YouTube playlist that has a lot of YouTube videos that are all pretty digestible and shortened content, 3 to 5 minutes or so. And it will take you through a whole lot of the basics of Workbench. So if you're starting, or even if you're pretty advanced, there's a whole YouTube playlist, and that's accessible straight from Workbench, the help feature. The next thing is the Wireless Workbench help system, which is a website that we've created that you can search based on what you're trying to do. So if I type in inclusion, you're going to see that there's a whole bunch of articles here: inclusion groups, resolve interference with inclusion groups, frequency coordination and device settings for Shure products, respond to interference events, frequency coordination tab. I mean, so whatever you're trying to do, just go in here and hit search, and you're probably going to find a pretty healthy amount of answers there. Also, there is release notes. So view release notes, and this will give you all the information on what's new in every version over time, right? So this will show me 6.13.3. This will show me all of the notes, known issues, inventory, everything that's been updated over, I think, the history of the software. Maybe we just brought this down to 6.9. Okay, so the last 10 or 12 updates, you can go through here and see what's been added. So that's one way. It's all built into the software. Just Wireless Workbench help.
That's great.
Cool.
So we got a couple more questions about antennas. So let's, Greg asked first, can we describe the antenna angle placement in terms of degrees? Maybe Scott, you want to talk about polarization for how you should have your...
Yeah, so basically 90 degrees, different angle, still pointing at the same thing. And it is, antenna polarization is a whole nother topic, but basically what we're talking about is like a handheld mic. It has an orientation. It's going to actually transmit through the air with a little bit of an angle to it. And of course, it's a handheld that might be in all sorts of positions. So your receive antenna also has an angle. And when they're lined up, that's the best possible transfer. If they're not at all lined up, that's the worst possible transfer. So if you have two antennas, you make one of them like this and one of them like that, or maybe like this and like that. So no matter where it goes, it tends to be lining up with one antenna or another.
Yeah, there was actually a great graphic on a Shure blog a while back that showed the polarization drop. I think it was, if you had both of them parallel to each other, you might lose 12 dB when you're off axis to it. But with the 90 degrees, it only loses, I think, 3 dB in each direction. So I'll try to look for that graphic and include it in the follow-up email for everyone as well.
Yeah, and then the big thing about a helical antenna, which is, it looks like a security dome antenna if you ever see one. Those are kind of a different construction, and it doesn't have an angle. You lose 3 dB, I think, matching from helical to polarized, but that's at any angle. And so that's why you tend to see those for in-ears, because there's no diversity in most in-ear systems. Ooh, cool.
Yeah.
Like
and that's
that.
what John had asked. As far as IEM transmitters are concerned, you can combine multiple transmitters and feed those into an antenna. What antenna options do you have? Is because you only have one transmit antenna, is the helical the best option then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because you also only have one receive antenna on most systems.
Sure.
So PSM 1000 has two antennas on the belt pack, and there's some other systems from other manufacturers that do clever tricks to try to do the same thing. But you don't have diversity the way you have with the wireless microphone receivers. So any little thing you can do to improve the situation is for the best.
One more on the IEM transmission combiner, right? So first off, you'd want to use a proper combiner for that, right? You don't want to go buy passive RF splitters and like pull them off of a bunch of transmitters and put them into an antenna, right?
2 to 1 to 2 to 1 to 2 to 1.
Yeah. So that's what an antenna combiner does. We make some of those products. 821s and 421s are the most popular from Shure, but a lot of people ask, well, what if I need more than 8? And the reality of that is you don't really want to do more than 8 into one antenna, because the intermods and the power of that many frequencies going through one combiner and then through one antenna, 8's kind of the number where we say, hey, this is an acceptable amount of RF noise that is created coming off of your transmit antenna. So going back to the question earlier, how far should my transmit antenna be away? That's going to fluctuate a little bit. If you've got 2 frequencies coming out of that transmit antenna and they're on 10 milliwatts, you might have less of a need to keep that antenna as far away from your receive antennas than you would if you had 8 at 150 milliwatts, right? So all of this changes. It's not necessarily black and white. You really need to understand how much power and how many intermods and how many frequencies are you creating by what you're combining and what you're pushing out of that antenna. So use a proper combiner, never do more than 8. That's kind of the points I wanted to make as far as IEM combining.
Definitely. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
So we got 2 more questions, and I think we can maybe combine these 2 under the snooping for extra interference. The first one is, what issues, if any, have you had experience with Wi-Fi signals and RF signals? Are there Wi-Fi distros an issue? So maybe we can talk about the Spectrum and the Shure products that might exist where you might have some Wi-Fi issue interference. Jason, if you want to throw that to you.
Yeah. So Wi-Fi lives in 2 zones right now, 2 frequency bands. That's 2.4 gig and 5 gig. And there's really one of the only products we make that lives there is the GLXD, right? Which is the 2.4 gigahertz system. So if you have a ton of 2.4 Wi-Fi in your venue or your church or your whatever it may be, GLXD may not be the answer for your RF problems. It is entirely possible for Wi-Fi to interrupt our 2.4 gigahertz GLXD system. However, it is highly unlikely, if not existent, where Wi-Fi would interrupt VHF or UHF RF. If you had a if you had a bad wireless access point that had really bad filtration and somehow was amped up in power, I suppose it was possible, but it's not a likely interference of VHF and UHF wireless microphones or in-ears in my experience.
And I think it's worth noting that GLXD would not be coordinated in the same Workbench software that actually has its own frequency hopping that I forget the part number, but the antenna splitter that works with GLXD does a little bit of searching for open frequencies in that Wi-Fi zone.
Correct. Correct. You can, in Workbench, if I can pull it up, you can do a scan of that space with the show link. So let's see here. I will share my screen again real quick.
And we actually got in another question. Yes, ShowLink does function in the 2.4 gig.
It does.
That's
correct. So ShowLink does live in 2.4. However, ShowLink is what we call, it's a kind of our own protocol based off of Zigbee. And so standard 2.4 Wi-Fi, I believe, is channels 12 through 16. If I remember correctly. And you'll notice down here what I did is let me back up a minute here. Up in the top left, there's this thing called ShowLink plot. I'm going to fire that open. If you have a ShowLink connected, you can open this. So I'm going to open this and hit AD610, which I have a 610 connected, and I'm going to hit begin. And it's going to give me an active ShowLink plot or frequency scan of that spectrum. Now you'll notice what I'm looking at is channels 11 through 26. Wi-Fi is channels 12 through 16. So there's a couple of things to note here. My ShowLink has selected, based on its own internal scanning, to operate in channel 20. And some of you may be going, hey, there's some signal here. There's a bunch of noise. Well, that noise is the ShowLink operating there. So you can manually change your ShowLink. So like 25 looks pretty good. I can manually force it to operate into channel 25 inside of Workbench in its parameters. But this is a way, if you have a ShowLink, to look at your Wi-Fi band, see where the noise is happening. Down here, like 16, 17, this is 16 actually, is most likely my house Wi-Fi that's taking place. I could do some troubleshooting and turn it off and watch it drop, but that's one way to look at it.
And to be clear for anyone that's not familiar, the ShowLink is only control data that's being sent to the Axiom digital systems. There is no audio in that spectrum, correct?
Correct. And if you're worrying about whether or not ShowLink will function in Wi-Fi, we've had ShowLink installed at some of the biggest events in the world, like Super Bowl, where there is a massive 2.4 Wi-Fi installation, and ShowLink doesn't have a problem. It was built when Wi-Fi existed. It's designed to work around ShowLink. It is a top-tier wireless control product for our top-tier wireless. So we've gone to great lengths to make sure that ShowLink would not be affected by Wi-Fi, and we've proven that theory quite a few times.
Great. All right, we got one more question from Jim Frazier here. And Scott, maybe you can help with this one. Any examples of security radios that may pop up in a UHF scan, or maybe even VHF? Is there any way to find those outside of a lucky scan? Have you ever run into that issue, Scott?
Well, first way is to advance it and find out what they're using.
Sure.
And say, what are you guys doing for radios? And I actually, only one time have I seen a band's writer ask about that. And I had to ask and find out, and it was, we had frequencies to see if we could avoid, and that worked out. Usually the business radios are below 470. They are 450 to 460 or something like that. That's kind of your usual business radio thing area. So they're not really an issue. They are very high powered devices, but they tend not to be on stage. So it's usually not an issue.
Sure. And maybe this is a good segue to one final comment from me. Or maybe Scott, you could talk about this a little bit too. The public safety in channels 14 and 15, specifically in Chicago. It's very important that even though you might scan and not see information there, to still avoid some of those areas because you might have some traffic. Well, also it's reserved for public safety typically. So Scott, maybe you can talk about how you avoid public safety, if you just block it out altogether, or do you look up frequencies specifically?
Well, okay, so that is something that the Shure's the frequency database does find that for you. If you notice, all the ones we've looked at, or the ones that I did, 14 and 15 are excluded as TV channels, and those are reserved, and actually in most of the big cities they are. 14, 15, sometimes 16 are reserved for land mobile radio, basically public safety. And what I tell people too is, okay, you might not see anything now, but come showtime when all the cops show up to control traffic and they have an ambulance standing by,
Yep.
then you're going to see it. Then it's too late to do much about it. So you definitely want to make sure that you know if those are going to be an issue where you are and avoid using those spaces.
It's tempting to see that as open space sometimes, but knowing that it is used for public safety is very important in your market.
Yeah, and that was, you mentioned this, that was updated and is updated in the frequency finder, and that's why I just showed my screen here, Scott. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you see here 1415, as you were talking about, in Chicago is listed as safety, and it's a public safety channel. So you can see that those are now updated with the correct information in frequency finder.
That's great. Doesn't look like we have any more questions here. Actually, we just got a great anonymous question. Scott, what genre of music is Pile of Sweaters? Do we know that?
They're a Canadian indie band.
Ah, okay. That's great. Nice. No, that's great. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jason, for your time here. Thank you, Shawn, for being in the background and helping out as well. I'm going to go back to share my screen now. Sorry, I'm an audio guy, so a little slow on this. All right, great.
Video when you need them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so thanks to everyone for attending. Thanks for everyone for sticking around, 30 people for sticking around through the Q&A as well. Hope you found some new tips, some new tricks from right-clicking in Wireless Workbench. Again, thanks you to Scott. Thank you to Jason. Thank you to Shawn. Thank you to Matt Collera also from the TC Furlong team. He was helping out behind the scenes here. If you do have any additional questions, anything that we might have glossed over that you think about after this, feel free to submit any of those to the sales@tcfurlong.com email address. There is also going to be a survey once you exit the webinar, which will give you a chance to enter some questions there in the form. So I think that is it. Thanks again for everyone for coming out, and stay in touch. We'll be following up with an email to everyone that attended with a link to the recording of this, and hopefully also include you in announcements for future webinars as well. So great. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, guys.